I now look to Nicky Crompton, Regent's Park College Secretaries Committee, to open the case for the opposition. Hear, hear.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great privilege to speak in this chamber on such an important issue, and I want to thank you for holding this debate. I'm also immensely grateful to have the opportunity to put my geography degree to some use on a Thursday night. It doesn't happen often. The climate emergency is without doubt the single biggest issue facing humanity. Consequences will be severe, and without massive concerted action, they will be detrimental and irreversible. This is something on which people on both sides of the House can agree. No matter how the proposition may try to frame things, this is not a debate between those who recognise the threat caused by climate change and those who deny climate change. This is not a debate about the nature nor the extent of the problem we face. This is a debate on how best to confront and solve these issues. So do high-profile protests help? Are they the best course of action? And in particular, does the act of breaking the law help? In the short term, the answer might appear to be yes. Protests can raise awareness and bring issues into the public and personal focus. However, in breaking the law, going beyond what the legal right to peaceful protest entails, might attract more attention to the issue. However, as a strategy, extra-legal protest is fraught with danger, and I believe is doomed to failure in the long term. And by failing, it will put back the cause that we all clearly care passionately about. Therefore, my arguments will centre around the idea that the only feasible long-term solutions arise through consensus. In order to create meaningful change, we need to unite, not divide people. I'll view this at three scales. Firstly, the individual level. Making radical choices making radical changes to the way we live our day-to-day lives must become a majority course of action. Secondly, at the national political level. Given that so much of what needs to be put into place from a policy perspective requires government action and initiative, there needs to be a clear and tangible political consensus for state action. And thirdly, at the international level. There is little point in national action unless it's widespread across nations. Consensus is needed amongst governments across the world who need to desire to be seen as leading in this effort on the international stage. However, before I go any further, it falls upon me to introduce this evening's guest speakers. You've just heard from Julia Willemans. Julia is the Women's Officer at the Oxford Union and a second-year French and Portuguese student at Merton College. Among other things, Julia is also an entrepreneur and is co-founder of soon-to-be-launched social app Circles. Not that Merton's reputation would suggest that any such help is needed. All jokes aside, it's been great working with Julia this term, and I hope after this debate I will not be deleted from her circle. Next, we'll be hearing from Dr. Gail Bradbrook, a leading environmentalist and, of course, the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. Dr. Bradbrook holds a PhD in molecular biology and is an advocate for mass civil disobedience as a solution to tackle the climate crisis. Finally, we'll hear from Amelia Womack. Aged just 29, Amelia became the youngest deputy leader of a UK political party when she took over in 2014 as deputy leader of the Green Party, and is now running as their parliamentary candidate in Newport West in the upcoming general election. So after we're done tonight, Amelia will be looking to go from arguing for law breaking to law making. Mr. President, these are your guest speakers, and they're of course most welcome. So, why would people advocate breaking the law? Let's start with the theory. So here's a quote from This Is Not a Drill, the handbook of Extinction Rebellion. You have to break the law. This is the essence of the non-violent method because it creates the social tension and the public drama which are vital to create change. So here we have a proposal to break the law in order to influence public discourse. However, I'd add that polls produced over 10 plus years by Ipsos Mori and other sources have around 80% of the British population either very or fairly concerned about climate change. Maybe there's a less clear view on the policy and the behavioural changes that are needed, and this is hugely important. However, the basic level of concern is there. There just needs to be an increased recognition of the urgency of the issue. Furthermore, this general public consensus needs to be translated into political will. While it might begin at the grassroots level, this political will needs to take place on the national and supranational scale. The climate emergency is a global emergency for which global solutions are necessary. The question here is, Will the act of breaking the law help or hurt the translation of generic concern into political action at any level? Well, in addition to concerns about climate, law and order is a fundamental concern of the UK public, and one which is arguably immediately tangible to people who might not yet have seen the light on climate change policy. A YouGov poll that ranks the environment as the fourth most important issue ranks crime as third. Make people victims of civil disobedience or disorder, and you will tap into a very strong current of resentment that will harm the movement to no end. This call for social tension or public drama is inherently divisive, and there is a very real risk of alienating people who genuinely believe in the cause, and reduce consensus as they're put off by disruptive action. Giving cakes to motorists, flowers to policemen, or engaging in impromptu discos as advocated in This Is Not a Drill will not help. We also need to think about the economic, real-life impacts of these protests. This Is Not a Drill advocates targeting the wealthiest in order to influence policy. It states that without disruption, there is no economic cost, and without economic costs, the guys running this world really don't care. It then goes on to say you have to hit them where it hurts, in their pockets. However, let's think about what really happens. Let's picture ourselves at a recent protest in Canning Town tube station. Who do we think were the most effective? Do we think the Rupert Murdochs, the Mike Ashleys, the Jim Radcliffes of the world were stood there waiting for their train, along with a few hundred others whose days were sacrificed for the greater good? Do we think the first thing Mike Ashley did when he finally got into the office was put his feet up on the desk, take a sip from his Sports Direct mug, and call Boris and tell him, "Enough is enough. I was late to work, the trains were a nightmare, now we need to save the planet"? Is this really how this works? Of course not. The impact of these protests is real, and it is real, is concentrated on the day-to-day lives of the unfortunate people who depend on our roads and our trains to get them to their places of work, their livelihood, and they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Moreover, linking back to what I just said, these sorts of extra-legal protests can cause resentment and hostility among those needed on side in order to bring about change. Instead of raising awareness about the urgency required to tackle the climate crisis, it defines environmental activism in such a way that is disruptive and will only ever be able to include a fringe minority, even though there is a broadly defined majority consensus on the issue. And finally, we need to realise the longer-term dangers of breaking the law, in particular the precedents it sets and the inherent hypocrisy of so doing. If the law is being broken in order to seek changes to the law, these changes are naturally built upon weak foundations. What is to stop the positive law changes made from being broken? We also need to remember that the rule of law applies to all parties. Many stakeholders, including the police, have an important role to play in saving the planet. And on the topic of yesterday's ruling, the police also have a crucial role to play in upholding the law, and in so doing, they themselves should not be breaking the law. I'm not arguing with the proposition in that respect. However, the precedent of breaking the law means that any positive change that is accomplished is automatically open to being undermined. No matter how good the cause, if you push too hard and fail to build consensus and political will, you end up with depression and unsatisfactory goals. Even if political will were to be achieved in this way, given the radical nature of these protests, we would end up with a race to the bottom amongst political parties on policy focused purely on the short term and on unsustainable goals and unrealistic targets. So while protest clearly has a role to play, and has done throughout history on a number of important issues, once the law has been broken, there is a very slippery slope. Notwithstanding the broader societal impacts of a weak rule of law, this will doom the cause of radical climate action and hence harm the planet more still. Therefore, to summarise, the climate emergency is real and it's huge. Urgent action is clearly needed. However, tonight I urge you to vote against this motion, to vote against breaking the law as the means by which to tackle this issue, to vote against creating division and resentment among ordinary people who generally recognise the issues we're faced with. Instead, vote for consensus and clarity on the urgency of the issue. Vote for practical solutions that can be adopted on a global scale. We need leadership and accountability, both at the personal level, in the decisions we make about the way we lead our lives, and at the political level. And the upcoming general election in the UK provides a great opportunity for this. Thank you.